"What the hell are you doing to my children?" Richard Walker's voice cracked through the marble silence, thundering down the sunlit corridor like a shockwave. He stood frozen in the doorway of the sitting room, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. Hannah didn't move. Mist lingered in the air, catching beams of sunlight, scattering them like tiny stars across the floor. Ella and Jane, his blind 6-year-old daughters, were laughing and following the sparkles with their eyes. Hannah still held the spray bottle in her hand. The look on her face wasn't guilt, it wasn't fear, it was something more dangerous. Hope. Richard's eyes went wide. "Are you insane?" he barked. "I gave you strict instructions." Hannah didn't answer. Not yet. She couldn't. Not when Ella's face was glowing. Not when Jane was reaching out toward the light. For a split second, the world slowed down. In that silence, Hannah thought only one thing. This is it. This is the moment everything breaks. Or everything begins. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind. 6 weeks earlier. Back to the day a young woman stepped onto the grounds of the Walker estate with nothing but a duffel bag and a quiet promise she'd made to herself long ago. Help where you can, even if it costs you everything. The mansion stood like a monument to grief, towering, beautiful, cold, gilded mirrors that never reflected joy, velvet curtains that blocked more than sunlight, hallways that swallowed every sound. It was a house built on billions and broken hearts. Richard Walker, the tech mogul whose empire had changed the digital world, hadn't smiled in years. Not since the crash, not since the twins lost their mother and their sight. He buried himself in code, in contracts, in control. Dozens of nannies had come and gone. Some left after a week. Others were escorted out in tears. And the girls? Sweet, silent Ella. Thoughtful, dreamy Jane. They lived in shadows, not just because they were blind, but because no one dared bring them light. That's when Hannah arrived. 29, a quiet presence. Scrubs instead of silk. A gentle voice, a steady hand. The staff didn't ask questions. The housekeeper, Rosa, only offered a warning. "Keep your head down. He doesn't like surprises." And Hannah nodded, smiled politely, but said nothing. Because Hannah had learned something long ago, something she never told anyone at the agency, that beneath every silent child was a voice waiting to be heard, and behind every locked door was a chance waiting to be taken. She wasn't just a nanny, she used to be something else entirely, and she hadn't come here to babysit, she'd come here to begin again. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this video makes you believe nothing is impossible, if only you believe. For a long time after he shouted, no one moved. Not Hannah, not the girls, not even Richard. The mist still lingered in the air, sparkling in the light. Ella giggled. Jane reached forward, fingertips outstretched, eyes wide. And Richard, the billionaire who ran entire continents from behind a desk, stood frozen, watching his blind daughters follow the light. Hannah didn't speak. Her chest rose and fell slowly. One hand still held the spray bottle, the other curled gently around
Something in
Jane's
the air
back.
shifted, fragile, electric, irreversibly changed, and in that suspended moment, a story was already unraveling. Let's go back. 6 weeks earlier, before the sparkles, before the laughter, before the unspoken rules were broken, back to the day a woman with a quiet smile and a duffel bag crossed the iron gates of the Walker estate and stepped into a house that didn't remember how to feel. The mansion was silent, not peaceful, not calm, just silent. Walls too clean, mirrors too polished, the kind of place where footsteps echo even when you try not to exist. The staff moved like clockwork, everything choreographed. Breakfast at 8, tutors at 9, nap at 1. No deviations, no surprises. Rosa, the housekeeper, barely looked up from the linens when Hannah arrived. She handed her a clipboard and murmured without emotion, "Just follow the schedule. Don't try to fix anything here. Hannah nodded. She understood what that meant. This wasn't a home. It was a museum of what used to be. Upstairs the girls were waiting. Ella and Jane, 6 years old. Tiny, delicate, identical in every way, except in spirit. They sat across from each other in a massive playroom filled with untouched toys, their heads tilted slightly toward the window, but not quite facing the light. There was no laughter, no eye contact, no curiosity, only stillness. They'd been blind since the accident, the one that took their mother. And since that day, Richard Walker had thrown himself into silence. Grief turned into routine. Routine turned into distance, and distance turned into control. Nannies came and went. Some left in tears. Others weren't even noticed. Hannah didn't come to make noise. She knew how to listen. And from the moment she stepped into the girls' room, she heard everything no one else seemed to hear. The way Ella's fingers lingered on textured fabrics, the way Jane tilted her head when the kettle whistled in the kitchen downstairs, the way both girls seemed to lean toward the warmth of morning sun, even if they couldn't see it. Tiny things, quiet things. But to Hannah they were loud, because once upon a time she had studied these moments, before the scandal, before the suspension, before her name was whispered behind closed doors and her research reduced to nothing. She was a therapist once, a gifted one, until one false accusation left her license in ashes and her belief in herself even more broken. Now she wore scrubs instead of lab coats, smiled quietly instead of presenting papers, and answered to parents who never asked who she used to be. But on her third night at the Walker estate, she couldn't sleep. Ella had laughed that day, just once, at the sound of a wooden spoon tapping a pan. It was small, a flicker, gone in a second. But for Hannah it lit something she hadn't felt in years, not ambition, not defiance, purpose. The next morning, she folded a scarf with a lavender scent and let the twins hold it during story time, just to see. They didn't speak, but they didn't let go either. She wrote it down in a notebook she never showed anyone. Not because she was planning anything, but because she wasn't ready to stop being who she was, and for the first time in years something inside her whispered, "You can still help, even if no one knows what you're doing." In the Walker mansion, silence wasn't just a sound. It was a rule, a rhythm, a way of life. No raised voices, no sudden laughter, no music that hadn't been approved and preloaded by staff. Everything was muted, as if the house itself was still grieving. Even the clocks ticked quietly. Hannah's first few days passed like pages turning in a book she hadn't chosen to read. Breakfast trays were delivered on time, lessons conducted through whispered instructions. The girls were dressed, fed, bathed, not touched too much, not spoken to unless necessary. They followed commands like wind-up dolls, but they never looked up. They didn't need to. There was nothing in this house worth looking at. The twins lived in routine, not play, not presence, routine. Ella, the more expressive of the two, sometimes hummed under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Jane preferred silence, but when Hannah passed her a warm cloth during bath time, she held it a little longer than needed. These were the only signs of life she could find. They broke Hannah's heart, not with sadness, but with recognition, because she knew what it felt like, to still be breathing and not feel alive. The staff didn't speak unless spoken to. The chef left Hannah's meals in the back hallway. The driver rarely made eye contact. Only Rosa lingered. She watched Hannah carefully, the way a nurse might watch a patient who insists they're fine. One afternoon, as they folded sheets in the laundry room, Rosa said, without looking up, "You're not the first one to try." Hannah paused, a clean pillowcase in her hands. Rosa smoothed the edge of a fitted sheet and added, "Every nanny thinks they're going to save this place, but he doesn't let anyone in." "Richard?" Hannah asked quietly. "Mr. Walker." Rosa corrected her without hesitation. "You'll last longer if you don't forget that." There was no malice in her voice, just truth, a woman who'd seen too many people arrive with good hearts and leave with broken ones. Richard Walker was a ghost in his own home. Some nights, Hannah would hear the front door open at 2 a.m., then footsteps moving down the hall toward the west wing. Sometimes the girls asked if their father was back, But before Hannah could answer, they'd already turned over in bed, as if it didn't matter. And maybe it didn't. Not anymore. On the fifth night, Hannah sat by the window in her small attic room, watching fog roll in over the lawn. She hadn't spoken to Richard since the day he shook her hand at the door, briefly, like a man shaking off an obligation. He hadn't asked about her credentials, didn't want to know where she came from, only said, "They're fragile. Don't push them." That was it. No warmth, no hope. Just an unspoken warning. Don't try to fix what's already broken. But Hannah wasn't here to fix anything. Not anymore. She was just trying to remember who she used to be. Back in Chicago, there was a time her name had weight. She'd walked through children's hospitals and been greeted with nods of respect, smiles of relief. Her research had been featured at conferences. Her case studies praised. She'd spoken about the power of multisensory therapy with conviction. Now she was folding someone else's towels in a mansion full of ghosts. But purpose is stubborn. It doesn't always vanish when your reputation does. Sometimes it hides in the quiet and waits. The following morning, as Hannah brushed Jane's hair, a tiny thread of a smile pulled at the corner of the girl's lips. It was there for only a second. But that second was everything. Later that day, she walked past the playroom and paused. Ella was sitting alone with a small stuffed bear. Her fingers moved slowly over the fur, then up toward the bow on its neck. She wasn't playing, not quite, but she was feeling, exploring. That night, Hannah opened a drawer beside her bed and pulled out an old, worn leather journal. She hadn't touched it since the day everything fell apart, the day she swore she'd never practice again. But tonight she flipped to a blank page and wrote 5 words. Ella turned towards sound today. It wasn't a breakthrough. Not yet. But it was something. Something small. Something real. Something alive. It started with a hum. Hannah was slicing apples in the kitchen, the ones Ella liked peeled, the way Rosa showed her, and without thinking, she hummed a tune her mother used to sing while cooking. Nothing loud, just a soft, gentle melody floating through the still air. She didn't expect anyone to hear, but from the corner of the breakfast nook, Jane shifted, not just turned her head, tilted it, toward the sound, just a fraction of a second. But enough. Later that morning, during playtime, Hannah tried something else. A storybook, not read aloud but placed in front of the girls with a faint trace of lavender oil dabbed along the edge. Ella ran her fingers across the pages, stopped, smiled. A real one. Subtle. But there. And that's when Hannah began logging every detail again, in that old leather notebook she thought she'd never open. She didn't call it therapy, didn't call it anything, just observation. The house was still watching. Richard hadn't spoken to her since the day she arrived, and Rosa was starting to linger near doorways a little too long. So Hannah moved carefully. No equipment, no protocols, no raised flags. Just intention. She began to change the rhythm of their days. Not by much, but enough to let the girls feel. She played soft jazz during breakfast, just low enough to blend with the morning birds outside. She swapped synthetic bath soaps with organic ones, chamomile, vanilla, orange blossom. Each night, she used a warm, textured cloth to wipe their hands before bed, letting their skin memorize softness. The girls didn't talk about it, but they responded. Ella began reaching out first. Jane's posture straightened when Hannah entered the room. They started waiting for her, smiling when she arrived. It was during one of these small, silent victories that Hannah stopped outside the window of the music room and exhaled. She pressed a palm to the cold glass and whispered, "They're waking up." Then, a thought. A memory. A hallway in a hospital long ago, where she once taught a blind toddler to follow the vibration of a cello across a room. Back then, she had charts, staff, funding, but this time all she had was instinct, and 2 little girls who didn't know they were healing. Have you ever had someone believe in your quietest potential, not when you were shining, but when you were still unsure? If someone once saw a light in you when you couldn't see it yourself, tell us who they were in the comments.
These people are rare, and they change everything. Back inside, Hannah pulled out a small toy from her personal bag, something she'd almost left behind when she packed for the job. A light wand, nothing fancy, just a slender tube that blinked in soft, shifting colors. She waited until nap time ended, until the room was dim, quiet, safe. Then she sat on the rug between the girls and whispered, "We're going to play a game." She didn't expect much. But when she flicked the wand on, Jane's fingers twitched. Ella turned her head, and for a second, just 1 second, her eyes fluttered. Not wide, not open, but searching. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, knees pulled to her chest, the notebook open on her lap. One word circled again and again. Reflex? She underlined it, then crossed it out. It wasn't a reflex. It was a response. The next morning, Rosa pulled her aside in the hallway, voice low, eyes sharp. "He has cameras in every room." Hannah blinked. "What?" "Mr. Walker, there are security feeds in the sitting room, bedrooms, even the playroom. He sees everything." Rosa stepped closer. "You're not like the others. You've lasted longer. Don't ruin it now." She walked away before Hannah could reply. But Hannah wasn't trying to last. She was trying to give those girls a shot. Every night the girls made progress, and every night Hannah felt the pull of a truth she had kept buried for years. She wasn't just a nanny, not really. She had once been something else, someone else. Before the scandal, before the silence, her name meant something. Dr. Hannah Elise Ford, pediatric sensory therapist. Respected, admired. She had lectured on neuroplasticity at Johns Hopkins. Her paper on cross-modal sensory recovery in blind children had been published in 3 languages. Hospitals flew her out to consult on complex cases. She'd been building something real. And then, everything collapsed. It started with a boy, a 6-year-old patient from a high-profile family in Chicago. She'd been treating him with a personalized sensory program, tactile pulses, spatial sound mapping, mild photic stimulation. The child was improving. Everyone saw it. But when he developed sudden seizures, the family blamed her. The father was a powerful donor. The media turned her research into headlines. Experimental therapy triggers emergency in child. Doctor under review after controversial stimulation session. It didn't matter that the seizures were later traced to an undiagnosed condition. By then, the hospital had already distanced itself. The board revoked her access. Her license was suspended, pending review. The clinic she'd just opened shuttered in 3 weeks. Funding pulled, staff resigned, her name, her work, gone overnight. She remembered packing her office at 2 a.m. No press, no defense, just one cardboard box and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She stopped answering calls. She stopped trying to explain. She disappeared. Her mother had begged her not to give up. "You're more than your title," she said. "Children still need you, even if the system doesn't. But when everything you built is stripped away, it takes a long time to believe you still have anything left to offer." And yet, here she was, in a mansion in Connecticut, holding a mist bottle in one hand and a little girl's progress in the other. Each day her instincts came back, not clinical ones, human ones. She remembered how to listen for breath changes, how to time music to touch, how to feel a child's world without needing to see it. But with every breakthrough came fear. Fear that Richard would find out, fear that she was risking more than just her job, fear that she would ruin everything, again. One evening, just after sunset, she sat on the window seat in the girls' room, watching Ella trace her fingers across a woven cushion. She whispered, "Do you know what this means?" Ella smiled, almost as if she did. Behind her, the door creaked. Rosa stood in the doorway. She'd seen the light wand earlier that week, and now she stood with folded arms and tired eyes. "Do you know what you're risking?" she asked. Hannah looked down at her hands. She wanted to lie, to say it was nothing, just toys, just play, but she couldn't, not anymore. "Yes," she said softly. Rosa didn't answer right away. She looked at the twins. now giggling quietly as they tried to catch the edge of a fabric Hannah had scented with orange peel. Then she turned back to Hannah. Her voice was low, worn, but not unkind. "You'd better be right." That night Hannah stood alone in the hallway, hand on the doorknob of her attic room. She looked down the corridor, toward the west wing where Richard slept. Somewhere behind that door was a man still grieving, still angry, still convinced that protecting his daughters meant keeping them untouched. But he hadn't seen what Hannah had seen. He hadn't heard Jane whisper, "It smells like the sun," or watched Ella reach toward the mist and laugh like she was catching stars. Hannah turned the doorknob and stepped inside. She sat down at her small desk, opened her notebook and wrote, "I am not here to be safe. I'm here to give them light." The mansion had never been loud. Even before the accident, it had been more gallery than home. Everything in its place, every sound, measured. Even joy, if it ever lived here, had tiptoed. But that week, something changed. It didn't start with music or footsteps or words. It started with laughter. It was Ella first, a soft, startled giggle that slipped out when a breeze brushed past her cheek and carried the scent of tangerine. Hannah had mixed the oil into the lotion that morning. Nothing special, just something warm, something alive. Ella's head turned toward the air. She smiled, then laughed, as if the scent had tickled something inside her, something that had been asleep. Jane followed, not with noise but with movement. She began tracing the edge of her bedsheet in slow, looping spirals, as if following a trail only she could feel. When Hannah whispered, "What does it feel like?" Jane whispered back, "Like clouds, but warm." And that's when Hannah knew. It was time. Time to try what she'd been afraid to. Not recklessly, not without care, but fully, with hope. That morning, she prepared the room differently. She pulled the curtains open just enough to let a single beam of sunlight spill through. Soft music played in the corner, cello, low and rich. On the rug sat a basket of everyday objects, velvet ribbon, a sponge, a wooden spoon, a cold stone, textures, temperatures, tones. And one more thing, tucked quietly in her pocket. A mist bottle. She began gently, letting the girls explore each item with their hands, describing what they were feeling, mirroring their reactions with soft laughter of her own. Then she uncapped a small vial of peppermint oil, placed a drop on a piece of cloth, let it drift near them without touching. Jane inhaled. Her shoulders rose. She smiled, a full, radiant smile. Ella reached out for the cloth before Hannah even said a word. Then came the light. Hannah waited until they were settled, still, trusting. Then stood near the window, where the sun streamed in. She held the mist bottle in her hand. "Ready for something special?" she asked. The girls nodded. She gave one soft spray into the sunlight. And suddenly, the air glittered. Tiny droplets caught in the beam, turning gold and silver and weightless. Ella gasped. Jane's mouth opened. Their heads turned, together, toward the sparkles. Then, laughter, loud, free, real. They reached up, trying to touch the floating specks, chasing the shimmer with their fingers, not seeing, not exactly, but responding, to light, to motion, to magic. Hannah could hardly breathe. She dropped to her knees beside them, not to teach, but to join. They laughed together, like they were creating something sacred and new, something that had no name yet, just sound and joy and presence. Down the hall, Rosa paused mid-step. The sound
She turned
made her
back,
eyes
walked
soften.
into the kitchen and said quietly to the cook, "They're laughing in there." He looked up. "The girls?" Rosa nodded, and neither of them said anything more. But something in the house shifted. That night, as Hannah tucked them in, Jane whispered, "The sparkles were dancing." Hannah kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, they were." Then Ella asked, "Can we do it again tomorrow?" Hannah smiled, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Every day." She stood at the doorway and watched them settle, and just before she turned off the lamp,
Jane whispered something she hadn't said to anyone in over a year. "Good night." Hannah closed the door with shaking hands. She didn't cry. Not yet. She walked down the hall, past the cameras, past the rules, past the memory of everything she'd lost. Back to her room. She opened her notebook, wrote one word. Laughter. And under it, in smaller letters, "We're getting closer." Somewhere along the line, it stopped feeling like work. It wasn't caregiving, wasn't therapy. It was something quieter. Sacred almost. The kind of thing you didn't talk about, because saying it out loud might scare it away. By the second week, Hannah had a rhythm, not just in routine, but in her hands, her voice, the room. Every sense was a tool now. Soft music in the background, textures laid out with intention. Sunlight streaming through the window like a spotlight made just for them. The girls responded faster, reached out sooner, smiled wider. And one morning Jane whispered, "I saw sparkles again." That night, Hannah sat by the window with her journal open, tracing old diagrams she hadn't looked at in years. Her fingers hovered over one, a therapy protocol she'd designed long ago, back when her name still meant something. It was never approved. Too new, too ambitious. But it was hers. A multi-sensory stimulation model combining warmth, mist, sound, and refracted light to trigger dormant neural pathways. It had only ever lived in theory. Until now. Until this house, these girls, this chance. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sketched, planned, timed her breath. Because tomorrow, she would try it. All of it. The next morning, the mansion was quiet. Richard had left for New York. Rosa was occupied downstairs. It was just Hannah, the girls, and a chance to prove to herself that what she once believed in could still be real. She prepared the room like a stage, curtains drawn just enough, heat turned slightly higher, the mist bottle warmed in her hands, classical music low in the background. Ella sat cross-legged. Jane lay on her side, eyes half closed. Hannah began gently. First, scent, orange blossom, familiar, grounding. Then, texture, warm velvet against their palms. Then, sound, a chime, soft and distant. Then, mist. A light spray into the beam of morning sunlight. Tiny droplets shimmered through the air. Ella gasped. Jane sat upright. Their eyes followed the trail, not just turned, but tracked. Ella laughed. Jane clapped. Then Jane reached forward and said, "There, right there, it's shiny." Hannah's heart caught in her throat. "What do you see, baby?" Jane smiled. The sparkles dancing again. She almost cried, but she didn't. Not yet. She reached for her notebook with shaking hands. She'd barely written 2 words when it happened. Footsteps, fast, heavy, angry. Then, the door, swung open, hard, and there he was, Richard Walker, back early, suit half-buttoned, eyes scanning the scene like a man watching his house burn. He took one look at the mist in the air, the girls laughing on the rug, the spray bottle in Hannah's hand, and his face changed. "What is this?" he asked. His voice didn't rise, but it was sharp enough to cut through the air. Hannah stood slowly, shielding the girls without meaning to. She didn't say anything. Not yet. "I told you not to do this," he said. "No experiments, no therapy, no risks." His voice cracked slightly, not with rage, with fear. He took a step closer. "You don't know what you're doing." Hannah's voice was quiet, but steady. "I do." He stared at her like she was a stranger. "You're just a nanny." She swallowed hard, hands trembling, then said what she had promised herself she wouldn't. "I used to be a pediatric sensory therapist, one of the best. I designed the protocol you just witnessed. And your daughters," she paused, looked down at them, "they're starting to see." For a full beat, no one spoke. The mist still hung in the light. The twins still laughed, unaware. And Richard Walker stood there, staring, not at Hannah, but through her, like he was watching something unravel in real time. "They're starting to see." Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper, but it landed like thunder. She knew what she was doing, and she knew what it could cost her. She stepped closer to the girls, slowly lowering the spray bottle, placing it on the rug like evidence at a crime scene. Richard's eyes didn't leave her. "You lied." "No," she said softly. "I didn't tell you everything. There's a difference." He let out a bitter breath. "You're not a caregiver." "I was. I am. But I'm also a therapist. I lost my license after a false malpractice claim. My name was dragged, my clinic was shut down. I stopped practicing now, but I didn't forget how." She looked up at him. "I wasn't experimenting on your daughters, Mr. Walker. I was helping them." Behind her, Jane laughed again, light, free, untouched by the tension. Ella turned her face toward the sunlight, fingers outstretched. Richard blinked. Once. Twice. Like he didn't know whether to scream or sit down. "You don't get to make decisions like this," he said finally. "They're my children. And they're responding." Hannah took a breath, a deep one that held years. "You can fire me, report me. I won't stop you, but please." She glanced down. "Don't take this from them." Richard stared at his daughters. Jane was humming. Ella was reaching again, not blindly, but toward something. Light, sound, warmth, something real. His jaw clenched, his eyes dropped to the floor. The weight of grief wrapped around him like it always had. But this time it didn't protect him. It pressed. Hannah waited. Not with defiance, but with a quiet kind of strength. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from surviving. And maybe that's what broke him. Not her words, not the science, but the silence, and how long his daughters had lived inside it. He spoke without looking at her. "Show me." She knelt beside the twins again, held the light wand gently between her fingers, switched it on. The soft, pulsing glow filled the air. "Ella," she whispered, "where's the sparkle?" Ella smiled. "There." She pointed, not randomly, directly toward the light. Then Jane reached for her sister's hand. "It's moving," she whispered. Richard didn't move, but his face crumbled. Just a little. And in that fragile silence, not the cold kind, but the kind that lets something new in, Hannah said one last thing. "I never came here to be seen. But your daughters, they deserve to be. Have you ever stood in front of someone heart-pounding and told them the truth, knowing it might cost you everything? If you have, tell us what it taught you. Because sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is stay honest when you have every reason not to." The next morning, Richard made a call. A quiet one. No lawyers, no staff. Just one name, Dr. Berman, a specialist in sensory neurodevelopment. Someone he hadn't spoken to since the twins were diagnosed. He asked for a favor. Then he walked down the hallway, stopped outside the girls' room, and listened. There it was again. Laughter. He closed his eyes. Not because it hurt, but because he wasn't ready for what it meant. It took 3 days for Dr. Berman to arrive. A quiet man, measured, known for publishing more than he spoke. He didn't come with a team, no clipboard, no fanfare, just one small case, a laptop, and a soft smile when he met the girls. Richard didn't introduce Hannah, didn't explain what had led up to the call. He just gestured toward the sitting room and said, "Watch." That morning the house felt different, as if even the walls were waiting. No one rushed, no one whispered. There were no rules, no scripts, just time. The kind of time that opens instead of closes. Hannah sat with the girls on the rug, same as before. Sunlight angled in across the floor. Bird song filtered through the open window. The scent of lavender hung in the air, calm, steady. And there was the mist bottle, held gently between her hands. Dr. Berman stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching without blinking. Richard stood behind him, not crossing his arms this time, not trying to control anything, just watching. Hannah began. Textures first, warm cloths, wooden blocks, smooth glass stones. Then sound, soft chimes, her own voice humming low. Then light. She sprayed the mist gently through the sunbeam, the air filled with sparkle. And like clockwork, Ella reached up. Jane turned her head. Then, Ella whispered, "It's spinning." Jane added, "It's gold today." Dr. Berman took one slow step forward. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just bent down, placed a small lens device near Jane's temple, and nodded. His eyes never left the girl's, but his voice was certain. There's photic response. Richard didn't move. Dr. Berman didn't breathe, looked at him. They have light perception. For a second, no one spoke, and then Richard exhaled, like a man finally coming up for air. That afternoon, the doctor stayed, ran quiet tests, asked Hannah about her notes, her methods, her past. He didn't question her credentials. He didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. By evening, the air in the mansion had changed. The girls weren't different, not really. But somehow, they felt more visible, as if the house had finally started looking back at them. Richard sat at the end of the hallway outside their room, not checking emails, not on a call, just sitting, listening. Inside, Ella was telling Jane about the color of a dream she'd had. Jane was humming something soft, and Hannah wasn't correcting, wasn't leading, just being. Rosa brought Richard tea, set it beside him without a word, then paused. "You've never sat here before." He didn't answer right away, then said, "I've never had a reason to." That night, Richard knocked gently on Hannah's door. She opened it, surprised, cautious. He didn't step inside, didn't raise his voice. He just asked, "How did you know?" Hannah didn't give a speech, didn't explain the research or the theory. She just looked at him and said, "Because I never stopped believing they could. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One person to keep seeing light, even when the world only sees darkness. And sometimes our miracles need witnesses, not to validate them, but to carry them forward." The next morning, for the first time in years, Richard didn't leave for the city. He stayed. He ate breakfast with the girls. He watched Jane trace sunlight patterns on the tablecloth with her fingertip. Watched Ella rest her head on Hannah's shoulder without being asked. And when Hannah got up to clean the dishes, he looked at her and said, "You're not just a nanny." And for the first time since she arrived, Hannah smiled, not out of politeness, but because she finally believed him. It was a Sunday morning, the kind that feels like it remembers something. The light came in gold, not soft, not harsh, just warm, honest. The house was quiet, but not in the old way, not hollow, not heavy, just still. Waiting. Hannah rose before dawn. No alarm, no schedule. She just knew. She dressed simply. Scrubs, no shoes. In the east wing, she prepared the sitting room. Windows cracked open. The air, cool and clean. Everything arranged, not with science, but with love. Warm textures in a woven basket. Scents, lavender, orange peel, soft earth, a folded blanket, a water bowl. The mist bottle, standing by the window. And the light wand, flickering once, steady now, like it had been waiting too. The girls came in quietly, still in their pajamas. Ella clutched a stuffed bear. Jane held her sister's hand. They didn't ask what was happening. They didn't need to. Richard arrived a moment later. No suit, no phone. Just him. He didn't speak, didn't sit, just leaned against the doorframe and watched. Hannah knelt on the rug, smiled at the girls. "Are you ready?" Two small nods. She began. The music came first, barely audible. A solo cello, rising slow like breath. Then touch. Soft velvet passed across tiny fingers. Then warmth. Hannah cupped their hands around a mug of heated water. Then scent. The orange peel, pressed between her palms. Then light. She stood near the window. Sunlight poured in, golden and full. She sprayed once. A soft, glistening mist. The droplets caught the beam, scattered it like stardust. And that's when it happened. Ella gasped. Her hands flew to her face. "I see it," she cried. "I see it. The sparkles." Jane turned,
Not just turned, but looked, eyes open, focusing. "I see you," she whispered. "Ella, I see you." The room stood still. Time bent inward. Nothing else existed. Not money, not medicine, not fear. Just two little girls finding light. Hannah couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She fell to her knees, not from exhaustion, but awe. The bear dropped from Ella's arms. Jane reached forward. And Richard, the man who hadn't cried since the day he buried his wife, fell to the floor. Arms open, heart wide. He gathered them close, pressed their faces to his chest, and whispered over and over, "My babies, my beautiful girls." Tears ran down Hannah's cheeks, not because she had succeeded, but because they had. Because they were whole, even before this. But now, they knew. Rosa watched from the hallway, hands over her mouth. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Richard found Hannah on the garden steps. She was barefoot, arms around her knees, the mist bottle beside her. He sat down slowly. "I used to think protecting them meant keeping the world out," he said, "but you brought it back to them." He reached into his pocket. A letter, official, her name on it. "I had it reviewed, quietly, by someone who owed me a favor." She unfolded the letter with trembling hands. Reinstatement, no press, no noise, just closure and a beginning. She looked at him. "Thank you," he shook his head. "No, thank you for not giving up on them, or yourself." From inside, the girls called her name. Hannah stood, wiped her eyes, turned toward the light. Sometimes healing doesn't come in hospitals. Sometimes it starts in silence and ends in sunlight. Today, Ella and Jane attend a school for children with visual impairments. Their vision is partially restored, their spirits fully awake. Hannah still lives at the Walker estate, not as a nanny, not as a therapist, but as family. And every morning, as the sun filters in through the tall windows, she sprays a little mist into the light, and the girls still smile.